Marlene Jefferson had survived a lot in her 63 years, but nothing prepared her for this part of life. Not the loss of her sister and brother-in-law in a car accident, not the cold letters from creditors, and certainly not the heavy silence that filled her apartment when her two young wards, her grandson Jeremiah and her niece Tasha, were finally asleep. She used to believe that age brought wisdom, that surviving meant winning. But now every day felt like a new chapter in defeat. The wrinkles on her hands weren't just from time. They were from scrubbing floors, stretching meals, and holding back tears. Her knees ached from standing on buses for hours. Her back bent not from age, but from carrying the weight of 2 children and a world that never looked her way with kindness. Marlene hadn't planned on raising children again. Retirement was a fantasy she never could afford, but peace, just a little peace, felt within reach once. But now she lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in the south side of Chicago, where the heat barely worked and the neighbors were too tired to care. Her days were split between a greasy diner and a late-night janitorial shift at a local office building. Her nights were spent praying that the children didn't notice the hunger she masked with fake smiles. Jeremiah, 11, was old enough to understand some things, like why the lights got cut off last month or why his grandma cried alone in the kitchen. Tasha, 7, still had that fragile innocence, but even she had begun to ask why other kids had warm coats and she didn't. Marlene had no answers, only promises she didn't know how to keep. The world judged her quickly. To the people in the grocery line, she was just another black woman with too many kids and not enough sense. To the landlord, she was a tenant 2 weeks behind. To society, she was invisible until she made noise, and when she did, they told her to quiet down. But Marlene wasn't lazy. She wasn't reckless. She was tired. She was grieving, and more than anything, she was trying, every single day. This story isn't about a woman who gave up. It's about a woman who refused to. Even when the walls closed in, even when her voice shook, even when no one showed up. Marlene did. For Jeremiah, for Tasha, for herself. Because sometimes, the strongest people are the ones the world tries the hardest to forget. Marlene woke up before the sun. Not because she had to. Her alarm hadn't gone off yet. But because her body no longer allowed her to rest. It was like her bones remembered the stress before her mind did. She lay still for a moment, listening to the soft, rhythmic breathing of the 2 children sharing her bed. The warmth of their small bodies was the only heat in the room. The apartment was cold. The ancient radiator clanked and hissed but never delivered more than a lukewarm sigh. Marlene slid out from under the covers carefully, not wanting to wake them. She tiptoed to the kitchen, wrapped in her housecoat, and stared at the nearly empty fridge. 1 egg, a third of a loaf of bread, a nearly dry bottle of milk. That was breakfast. She made it work, half a slice of toast each, a thin scramble for Jeremiah. Tasha got the last of the milk. Marlene drank water from the tap and told them she'd already eaten. "You know I can't work on a full stomach," she joked, but her smile didn't reach her eyes. At 6:45 a.m., she pulled her work uniform out of a plastic bag near the couch. It still smelled faintly of cleaning supplies. She pressed it with her hands and wiped down her shoes with a rag. She checked her prepaid bus card. 1 ride left. She'd have to walk home today. She left the kids with Miss Nadine, the elderly neighbor upstairs. Nadine charged nothing, but her own health was failing. As Marlene left, Jeremiah clung to her side. "Grandma, are the lights staying on this week?" he asked, eyes down. Marlene nodded, forcing confidence into her voice. "We're fine, baby. Just gotta make it through Friday." Friday meant tips. Maybe. The diner was already full when she arrived and short-staffed as always. Marlene moved fast, clearing tables, refilling coffee, ignoring the ache in her hips. Her manager, a 25-year-old named Eric, rolled his eyes when she took 5 seconds too long in the walk-in. "You moving in slow motion today, Marlene?" She didn't answer. She'd learned long ago that talking back to young white men with clipboards never went well. By noon, her lower back was screaming. At 1 p.m., she got a 10-minute break. She used it to call the power company and beg for an extension. "No, ma'am, the deadline's passed. We can't do anything until you make at least a partial payment." Marlene hung up. Her hand trembled as she wiped sweat from her brow. That evening, walking home with blistered feet and half a sandwich saved from her shift, she passed a group of teenage boys on the corner. One of them muttered loud enough for her to hear, "She out here looking like a ghost from the Depression." They laughed. She didn't turn around. When she got to the apartment, Tasha ran to her with a drawing she'd made, stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. "That's you, me, and Jeremiah," she said proudly. Marlene nodded, eyes stinging. She put the kids to bed with stories and kisses, promising that tomorrow would be better. But when she sat at the table and counted the few crumpled bills in her purse, reality settled over her like a winter fog. Rent was due in 3 days. The electricity notice said, "Final warning." The fridge was almost empty again. She put her head down on the table, surrounded by overdue bills and untouched dreams, and whispered the same silent prayer she whispered every night. "Lord, just one more day. Just help me make it through one more day." Saturday morning felt heavier than usual. Marlene's feet were sore before she even stood up. Her lower back throbbed, her shoulders ached, and a deep fatigue crept through her chest like cold water. But the children were hungry, and that was enough reason to keep moving. She checked the crumpled bills in her purse again. $17.38, it wasn't enough. Not for rent, not for the light bill, not for real groceries. But maybe, just maybe, it could stretch into something. Bread, milk, maybe eggs if there was a sale. She told the kids they were going on a little adventure and wrapped Tasha's braids into tight puffs while Jeremiah laced up his worn-out sneakers without being told. The walk to the store wasn't long, but it felt endless. The sun was already high, the sidewalks cracked, and Marlene's coat was too thin for the wind. On the way, Jeremiah kicked a bottle cap along the curb, silent. Tasha hummed, oblivious. Marlene said nothing. She was trying to hold her head high. Inside the store, everything felt louder. Fluorescent lights buzzed above her. The cart squeaked. The cashier's gum snapped. A man in a business suit stepped aside to avoid her, as if poverty might be contagious. Marlene guided the kids through the aisles like a general in enemy territory. She knew this routine well. Look for sales, check unit prices, avoid the name brands, keep the total low. At the dairy section, Tasha reached for a yogurt cup. "Put it back, baby," Marlene said gently. "But it's just one." "I know," she whispered, "but we need bread more." Tasha obeyed, but her face sank. That look was the worst. Not the tantrums, not the begging, just the quiet disappointment. At the register, Marlene tried to smile. The young cashier barely looked up as she scanned the items. A half-gallon of milk, day-old bread, generic cereal, 2 apples. Jeremiah was holding a can of ravioli they'd found on clearance. As the can rolled forward, it slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a loud clank. Heads turned. Someone behind them sighed. The cashier gave a half-smirk. "Y'all all right back there?" a man in line called out, not kindly. Jeremiah froze. Marlene bent down, picked up the can, and placed it back on the counter without speaking. She didn't look anyone in the eye. The total came to $16.91. She paid in cash, counting out wrinkled singles and coins. The cashier took the money slowly as if it offended her. When the receipt printed, Marlene grabbed the bag, whispered a thank you, and guided the children outside. Once they were a block away, she let out the breath she'd been holding. Jeremiah didn't say a word. Tasha clutched her coat. Marlene felt the weight of every glance, every judgment, every assumption. She wasn't begging. She wasn't stealing. She was just buying food. But still, she felt branded, as if the world could smell her desperation and wanted nothing to do with it. On the way home, Jeremiah broke the silence. Why they always look at us like that? Marlene didn't know how to answer, not in a way an 11-year-old could understand, not in a way that wouldn't make it worse. They don't know us, she said softly. They don't know what we're made of. He nodded slowly, but she could tell the shame had already sunk in. Back at the apartment, they shared a small lunch. Tasha giggled at something on the TV. Jeremiah sat quietly. Marlene watched them both and then turned toward the window. Outside, life moved on. Inside, she fought not to cry. That night, as she folded laundry by hand in the kitchen, she whispered to herself, not for the first time, I just want to be seen, not pitied, just seen. It started with a knock, 3 slow, deliberate taps on the door. Marlene froze mid-step. She knew that knock. It wasn't the neighbor. It wasn't Nadine. It was the kind that carried weight and paperwork. Jeremiah looked up from the couch, eyes wide. Should I open it? No, Marlene said firmly, pressing her finger to her lips. The knock came again. Then silence. A moment later, the sound of footsteps walking away. She waited until she heard the stairwell door shut before moving toward the peephole. A white envelope had been slid under the door. She picked it up with shaking hands. Notice of legal action. Final warning. It was from the hospital billing department. The surgery Jeremiah had after the accident, when they first brought him to her, had cost more than she made in a year. Medicaid covered some, but not nearly enough. For months, she'd ignored the letters, hoping they'd stop. Now they weren't letters. They were threats. She sat at the table, staring at the paper as if it might rewrite itself. Later that afternoon, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but Marlene didn't need caller ID. She answered anyway. Mrs. Jefferson, said a tight voice on the other end. This is Allied Credit Recovery Services. We've tried contacting you multiple times regarding your outstanding medical debt. Marlene closed her eyes. I've explained. I don't have it right now. Ma'am, we can't keep waiting. If we don't receive at least a partial payment within 5 business days, we will be forced to escalate this to legal proceedings. This could result in wage garnishment or liens on any personal assets. What assets? She said, the bitterness slipping out. The caller didn't laugh. We're simply doing our job. When the call ended, her hands were still trembling. That night the power flickered. Tasha looked up from her coloring book. Grandma, why the lights doing that again? Just the building being silly, Marlene said, forcing a smile. She knew better. They were close to disconnection. The yellow notice on the meter box outside was more honest than any landlord ever had been. The next morning she tried calling the billing office, hoping for compassion. The woman on the phone repeated policy lines like a machine. We understand your hardship, but full payment is expected. We can offer you a high-interest repayment plan. Marlene laughed. She didn't mean to. It just came out. Dry, bitter, hopeless. How do you expect me to pay hundreds a month when I barely eat? Ma'am, I'm not authorized to change your account. Would you like to speak to a supervisor? No, she whispered. You've said enough. Jeremiah overheard. He was quiet for the rest of the day. That evening, he approached her while she was folding clothes on the couch. Do you think if I got a job I could help? Her heart broke in a way no creditor could manage. You're a child, she said softly. You're not supposed to worry about bills. But I do, he replied. She pulled him close. That's my job, baby, not yours. But in her heart, she wasn't sure she believed her own words anymore. On Sunday morning, Marlene sat on the edge of her bed with her phone pressed to her ear, waiting. The sun hadn't fully risen yet, and the apartment was wrapped in silence. Jeremiah and Tasha were still asleep, huddled under a blanket on the couch where they'd fallen asleep, watching cartoons on low volume. Marlene had one hope left that week: Denise. They had known each other for over 30 years, back when they both worked the switchboard at an old telecom office that had long since shut down. Denise had climbed up in life. She had married well, moved to the suburbs, drove a Lexus, and a few days ago, when Marlene finally broke down and asked for help, Denise had said yes. "Of course I'll spot you a little something, girl. Don't even worry. Just call me Sunday morning, I'll drop it off." So she waited and waited. The phone rang 4 times before going to voicemail. She tried again an hour later, straight to voicemail. Again. Finally, around noon, Denise picked up. "Marlene, I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "This weekend just got away from me. My daughter had a last-minute volleyball tournament, and then we had to drive her to college visits, and then—" Marlene didn't speak. "I promise I didn't forget. Things have been crazy. You know how it is." Marlene swallowed hard. "So, nothing this week?" A pause. "I'll see what I can do next weekend." Click. The line went dead. Marlene stared at the phone for a long moment before setting it down gently on the windowsill. She wasn't angry. She wasn't surprised. Just tired. She sat back down at the table where her unopened bills waited like vultures. By Monday, the heater was still broken. The landlord, Mr. Craig, had promised he'd have a guy look at it. That was 2 weeks ago. When Marlene called again, she got voicemail. When she called a second time, he answered. "Miss Jefferson, I told you, I'm working on it. There's other tenants, you know. You ain't the only one." "It's 38 degrees in here," she said, trying to keep her voice calm. "The kids are sick. You said this would be fixed last week. Look, don't raise your voice. You don't pay premium rent. You don't get premium service. That's how it works." She felt the heat rise in her chest, not from the apartment, but from her own boiling frustration. When she hung up, her hands were shaking again. The school wasn't much better. Tasha's counselor had called Marlene in for a check-in. She used that polite, practiced tone that social workers used when they were trying to sound helpful, but came off like they were reading from a script. "We've noticed Tasha's been a little withdrawn lately. She mentioned the heat's not working at home." "She's fine," Marlene said tightly. "We're doing our best." "We do have access to some support programs," the counselor offered. "Food assistance, heating subsidies, if you'd be willing to fill out some paperwork." "I've already filled out 3 different sets of forms," Marlene interrupted. "They all said I made too much or filed too late." "Well, I'm happy to help you try again." Marlene nodded politely, but inside she was screaming. She walked home through a cold wind that blew through her coat like it wasn't even there. She passed a liquor store, a payday loan center, and 3 boarded-up storefronts. Help was always offered too late, or with strings, or in exchange for pieces of her pride. That evening, as she tucked the kids into bed, she kissed Tasha's forehead and whispered, "We're going to get through this." Tasha, half asleep, mumbled, "I know, Grandma. You always do." And Marlene almost believed it. The cold hit harder that night. The kind of cold that crept under the skin and into the bones. Marlene lay in bed fully clothed, wrapped in 2 blankets, and still couldn't stop shivering. Tasha was curled up against her, knees tucked to her chest. Jeremiah lay on a makeshift mattress on the floor, coughing quietly. It was 3:12 a.m. Marlene stared at the cracked ceiling, wide awake. Her thoughts were loud. She replayed every decision that led them here, every job she didn't take, every bill she delayed, every person she'd trusted who let her down. Shame crawled over her like a second skin. She hated this version of herself, the one who made excuses, the one who begged, the one who waited on broken promises like they were blessings. She sat up slowly. Her body protested, her knees cracked, her back screamed. But something inside her had shifted. She walked barefoot to the kitchen and stood there, staring at the stack of bills. They were scattered across the table like war medals, proof of battles fought and lost. She gathered them one by one into a pile. No more hiding, no more pushing them aside, no more waiting. That morning, after getting the kids off to school, Marlene walked 5 blocks to the community center. The receptionist, a young woman with purple braids and tired eyes, gave her a once-over but didn't comment. Marlene asked to speak with someone about emergency assistance. "Fill this out," the woman said, sliding over a clipboard. The form was long, impersonal. Marlene filled it in slowly. Name, address, income, dependents, social security number. Her hand shook on the lines where she had to admit just how little she had. "Someone will call you," the receptionist said when Marlene handed it back. Marlene didn't wait for a call. She went to the next place, the food pantry on 51st Street, then the city's public housing office, then the job resource center. At each stop, she was met with the same mixture of sympathy and indifference, but she didn't stop. Later that afternoon, she met Pastor Harold, a large man with a quiet voice and kind eyes. His church ran a small outreach program, meals, warm clothing, basic supplies. He offered a box of food and a coat for Tasha. Marlene hesitated. "I don't like taking handouts," she admitted. "This isn't charity," Pastor Harold said. "This is community. You're not alone, Miss Jefferson." Those words hit hard. She hadn't heard anything like that in a long time. That night, over a meal of canned soup and rice from the food pantry, she told Jeremiah and Tasha, "Things are going to change. Not fast, not easy, but I'm done waiting for someone to save us." Jeremiah nodded, his eyes cautious but hopeful. "What are we going to do?" "We're going to fight," she said, "in every way we can." For the first time in weeks, she felt something she thought she'd lost: control. Marlene stayed up late making a list of phone numbers, deadlines, places to visit. She tore up old bills and sorted the ones she could negotiate. She researched clinics offering sliding scale fees. She marked a calendar for every callback and reapplication. It wasn't a plan to win, it was a plan to survive. But sometimes, surviving is the first victory. Monday morning came with gray skies and an unforgiving chill. Marlene wrapped a scarf around her neck and packed peanut butter sandwiches for the kids' lunches. No more waiting, no more hoping. She had a plan now, written in black ink on a piece of cardboard taped to the fridge. It wasn't elegant, but it was clear. Step 1, emergency rent assistance. Step 2, utility hardship program. Step 3, extra hours or side work. Step 4, call legal aid. Step 5, don't give up. She repeated it like a mantra. After dropping the kids at school, she walked straight to the community resource office. The woman behind the desk, Gloria, was middle-aged, tired-looking, and didn't smile much. But she listened. Really listened. "You're not the only one," Gloria said. "The system's built to wear you down. But if you've got time and patience, we'll get through it." Together they started submitting applications. One for a temporary housing credit, one for food assistance, another for utility forgiveness. There were forms, deadlines, documents. Marlene didn't have some of the paperwork. She'd need to request copies. More waiting, more phone calls. Still, she left with a folder, a list of next steps, and Gloria's direct number. That afternoon, she walked to the second-hand clothing shop on 39th and asked if they needed help. The owner, A wiry older man with paint-stained hands said, "Not really, but I could use someone to sort the donation bins. It pays $20 a day, cash. That help?" It wasn't much, but it was something. She started working there 2 afternoons a week, after her morning shift at the diner, before her night shift at the office complex. On her feet, 16 hours a day. No breaks, no time to think. Jeremiah noticed the change. He started doing the dishes without being asked, helped Tasha with her homework, took out the trash. "You don't gotta do all this, Grandma," he said one night, watching her massage her swollen feet. She looked at him and smiled for real this time. "If I stop, I fall. And if I fall, we all fall." She also called Legal Aid Chicago. After waiting on hold for nearly 2 hours, she spoke to a woman named Rosa, a young paralegal who actually seemed to care. "We can't stop the debt collectors completely," Rosa explained, "but we can file a hardship defense. It won't erase the bills, but it can delay action." Rosa offered to help her draft a hardship letter and gave her an appointment to meet with an attorney the following week. It wasn't a solution, but it was leverage, and leverage mattered. At church on Sunday, Pastor Harold called her out by name during the closing prayer. "We lift up our sister Marlene Jefferson," he said, "as she pushes through hard days with unshakable love." After the service, a few women from the congregation quietly slipped her things: a bag of groceries, a pair of gently used winter boots for Tasha, a voucher for the food co-op. Marlene stood in the parking lot with her arms full and her heart heavy. She wasn't proud of needing help, but she was no longer ashamed of accepting it. That night, she updated the plan on the fridge. She added a new step. Step 6, accept grace when it comes. By the second week of the month, Marlene's exhaustion had sharpened into a kind of numbness. She no longer expected rest or comfort, only that the next problem would show up on time, and right on cue, it did. She came home from her late shift at the office building just after midnight. The hallway reeked of smoke, and the stairwell light was out again. She nearly tripped over a torn garbage bag on the third-floor landing. Inside her apartment, Jeremiah was still awake, reading under a blanket with a flashlight. "They taped something to the door," he said, his voice quiet. Marlene stepped back outside and peeled the notice off the peeling paint. "Final notice, lease termination imminent due to repeated complaints and late payments." She read it twice, then a third time. It wasn't a mistake. The next morning, Marlene stormed into the landlord's office, tiny, dusty, and half-lit by a broken fluorescent bulb. Mr. Craig, a balding man in his 50s with a tight smile and a Bluetooth earpiece always stuck in one ear, looked up from his desk. "I see you got the notice," he said casually, not even bothering to stand. "You're really putting us out?" Marlene asked. "Even after I told you I'm applying for rent assistance?" "You're 3 weeks late, and I've had noise complaints from 2 neighbors." "Noise?" she repeated, incredulous. "What noise? The kids coloring too loud." He shrugged. "Look, I don't make the rules." "That's exactly what you do," she said, voice rising. "You make them, then twist them to suit yourself." "Watch your tone," he snapped. She stepped closer, eyes fierce. "My tone is all I have left. You haven't fixed the heat, the lights, or the broken windows in the stairwell, but now you want to evict me on paper-thin excuses?" Mr. Craig leaned back in his chair and smiled that smug smile people wear when they think power protects them. "You got 10 days, Miss Jefferson. Maybe 12 if I feel generous." Marlene didn't flinch. "You'll hear from legal aid," he laughed. "What are they going to do? Sue me? You think you scare me with free lawyers and food stamps?" Her voice dropped low, calm. "I don't need to scare you, I just need to outlast you." She walked out without another word. By the time she got home, The kids were sitting on the floor, eating peanut butter crackers and watching an old cartoon. Tasha ran up to her. "Grandma, is he going to kick us out?" Marlene knelt beside her and looked her right in the eye. "Not if I have anything to say about it." That evening, she called Rosa from legal aid, explained everything. Rosa was calm but honest. "Technically, he can't evict you without a court order, but if he files, it'll show on your record, even if you win. That's how the system works." Marlene hung up and stood in the kitchen, breathing deeply. Her hands trembled with rage. Later that week, one of the neighbors, a woman Marlene barely knew, approached her in the hallway. "I heard what Craig's doing," the woman said. "It's wrong. If you need someone to write a letter or go to court with you, I will." It was unexpected, and it mattered. That night, Marlene made a new list. Not of bills, not of deadlines. A list of people she wasn't afraid of anymore. Mr. Craig was at the top. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, folded neatly in a plain white envelope with no markings. Marlene almost threw it away, assuming it was another debt notice. But something made her open it. Inside was a short typed message from the City Hardship Utilities Program. "Your application has been approved for temporary assistance. Electric and gas services will be restored under a 90-day deferment." She read the sentence again, and again. Then she sat down and let herself feel the tiniest bit of relief. It wasn't a full fix. It didn't erase the bill, but it meant the lights would stay on, the heat would return. Tasha wouldn't have to wear gloves indoors. Jeremiah could do his homework without a flashlight. That evening, when the radiators hissed to life and the baseboards began to warm, Tasha danced barefoot through the living room like it was magic. Jeremiah didn't say much. He just looked at his grandmother and gave her a single nod. That was enough. The food box from Pastor Harold came on Friday. Eggs, rice, a pack of chicken, a loaf of real bread. Marlene hadn't seen this much food in the kitchen in weeks. She made stew that night, thick and hot, with just enough seasoning to taste like memory. "I remember this," Jeremiah said, chewing slowly. "You made it when Mom was still around." Marlene didn't speak. She just reached across the table and held his hand. That weekend, Tasha got a winter coat from a donation drive. It was dark purple with a working zipper and no stains. She twirled in it for 10 minutes straight. Marlene watched from the doorway. Her eyes burned, but she didn't cry. It was strange how much power such small things could hold. A warm room, a working zipper, a decent meal. None of it made the debt go away. The landlord still lurked. The bills were still piled. But for a brief, sacred moment, the storm had paused. On Sunday, Marlene returned to the community center. Gloria greeted her with a nod. Not the hollow sympathy kind, but one of recognition, a respect between survivors. "I'm applying for the second phase," Marlene said. "Ongoing support, maybe a job training program." Gloria handed her another clipboard. "Let's get you signed up." It wasn't a promise. Nothing ever was. But it was a step. At church that afternoon, Pastor Harold invited her to speak at a women's meeting the next week. "Just to share a little of your story," he said. "Folks need to know they're not alone." At first, Marlene hesitated. She didn't see herself as a story worth telling. But later that night, as she folded laundry and listened to the soft breathing of 2 sleeping children, she realized something. Maybe survival was a story. Not the kind with fireworks or applause, but the kind where you kept going. Where you stood up again and again, even when everything told you to stay down. That night, she crossed off another line on the fridge. Step 7. Tell the truth, even the hard parts. By the 3rd week of the month, the small victories had started to fade into the background. The electric stayed on, yes, but barely. The food box had run out. The heater worked, but the hot water didn't. And Marlene was exhausted, truly dangerously exhausted. She had barely slept in 3 days. working double shifts and walking everywhere had worn down her body. Her knees ached so bad now that climbing stairs felt like punishment. Her vision blurred in the mornings. She kept forgetting things, appointments, deadlines, what day it was. One night she left a pot on the stove and nearly set off the building alarm. It was becoming too much. So when Ricky, a man she used to know from her diner job, showed up out of nowhere offering an easy way to make a little cash, she listened. "Nothing crazy," he said, leaning against a fence outside the corner store. "Just moving product. No risk. I know you need help." Marlene stared at him. "You mean drugs? Nothing heavy. Prescription stuff. Just bottles, legal gray area. You help me move it, I give you a cut. Fast. No paper trail." She shook her head. "Come on, Marlene. You're better than scrubbing toilets for tips. This could fix things quick. 1 week and you'd be caught up on rent." She didn't answer. That night she lay awake, going over it again and again. 1 week. That's all it would take to clear the landlord. Maybe buy real groceries. Maybe even fix her phone. She hated herself for even considering it. But when she opened the fridge and saw only a jar of mustard and a stick of butter, she felt something inside her bend. She didn't take Ricky's offer, but she didn't say no either, and that silence haunted her. Meanwhile, the landlord had begun knocking again, this time at night, always when the kids were already in bed. Just loud enough to rattle her nerves, just long enough to remind her that time was running out. "You know, if you just left quietly, I wouldn't have to go through the courts," he said through the door once. She didn't answer. She couldn't afford to move. She couldn't afford to stay. That week, she also missed Tasha's parent-teacher meeting. She'd fallen asleep on the bus home, woke up miles past her stop, and got home too late to call. The next day, Tasha didn't speak to her at all. Jeremiah became withdrawn. His teacher emailed that he was falling behind, distracted, tired. It broke her in ways the bills never could. She sat on the edge of her bed one evening, shoes still on, coat zipped up, body too tired to move, and whispered, "God, am I failing them?" No answer came, but then Jeremiah entered the room, quiet, carrying a folded piece of paper. "I wrote this in school," he said. "They asked us who we admire." Marlene unfolded it. Crude handwriting, misspelled words. But it said, "I admire my grandma because she never gives up, even when everything is bad. She works hard. She's tired, but she still makes me feel safe." She put the paper down and cried harder than she had in months. Not because it fixed anything, but because it reminded her why she couldn't let herself break. Marlene stood in front of the mirror and barely recognized herself. Dark circles, cracked lips, shoulders hunched. She was wearing the same coat she'd worn all winter, patched at the elbow, stained at the collar. She looked tired. No, worn. Like a page that had been folded too many times. Today was the hearing. Her landlord had followed through, filing for eviction just days before her rent assistance was approved. Legal aid had assigned her a junior attorney, kind and green. Rosa would be there too. She had insisted. "You don't have to be perfect, Miss Jefferson," Rosa told her that morning on the phone. "Just be honest." That Marlene could do. She left the kids with Miss Nadine, who, despite her age and aching joints, told Marlene firmly, "You go fight. I got them." When she walked into the courtroom, the space felt sterile and heavy. People whispered. A clerk called names. Marlene sat quietly, folding her hands to keep them from trembling. Her landlord sat 2 rows up, smug in a navy sweater and holding a manila folder like it was a weapon. The case didn't last long. Her lawyer spoke clearly. Rosa provided documents. Marlene answered questions softly but firmly. She told them about the heating issue, the overdue repairs, the threats, the approved aid. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply told the truth. When the judge asked if she had anything to say, she stood. "I'm not here asking for sympathy," she said. "I'm asking for fairness. I work. I pay what I can. I never stop trying. And I've got 2 kids depending on me. I've done everything right that I could afford to do." There was a pause. The judge nodded. By the time she stepped out into the hallway, the decision had been made, eviction postponed, no judgment on her record, time granted to complete her assistance process. It wasn't a win exactly, but it was not a loss, and that mattered. Outside, the air felt different, crisp, clean, not because anything magical had happened, but because she'd stood up and refused to be erased. Back home, Jeremiah and Tasha ran to meet her at the door. "You're still here?" Tasha asked, wide-eyed. Marlene crouched to hug her. "I'm not going anywhere, baby." Later that night, as they sat down to dinner, simple spaghetti and toast, Jeremiah pulled out another sheet of paper. "Can I read something?" Marlene smiled. "Always." He read aloud. "Sometimes the strongest people don't wear capes or suits. They wear old shoes and cook dinner and cry when no one sees. But they still fight. That's who I want to be when I grow up." Marlene didn't cry this time. She simply reached for his hand, looked at the 2 children sitting across from her, and breathed, deeply, fully. Because for the first time in a long while, she wasn't just surviving. She was standing. Marlene Jefferson's life didn't become easy after that. The bills kept coming. The hours stayed long. The promises of help were still slow, tangled in red tape and underfunded systems. Some days, the refrigerator still looked too empty. Some nights, the loneliness still crept in like cold air under the door. But something had changed. Not in the world, but in her. She had looked poverty in the face, looked judgment in the eyes, and said, "I'm still here." She had held her family together with nothing but love, duct tape, and the strength no one clapped for. She had learned how to ask for help without letting go of her dignity. She had failed in small ways, survived in quiet ones, and fought in every way that mattered. And her children noticed. Tasha began sleeping through the night again. Jeremiah started raising his hand in class. They began to draw pictures of a home, not perfect, not big, but warm, with 3 people inside, always holding hands. There were no headlines about Marlene, no interviews, no miracle turnaround, just a woman who kept showing up. That's what strength looks like sometimes. Not loud, not flashy, just steady, just there. So if you ever pass a woman like Marlene on the street, tired eyes, slow steps, holding a child's hand, don't look away. Don't write her story for her. She's already writing it herself, and it's not over yet.